Welcome to When Fear Reigns. I'm Anthony Catalano, filling in for Pastor Ben for this bonus episode, and as always, we have Dr. John Parlow.
Well, AC's in the house. Thanks for filling in for Ben again. Although, unfortunately, his family had a death in the family, and he's somewhere traveling in the snowy plains of Nebraska, I believe.
Well, today we are going to dig into the history, culture, and customs of Halloween. Should Christians celebrate Halloween? Where is the line? Are there things going on underneath the surface of the day that we aren't seeing but need to pay attention to? So, John, just to kind of begin, are you much of a Halloween guy?
No, for a lot of reasons, some of which I will bring up in this discussion. I know you're a big Halloween guy. I guess I should ask you at this point, what costume are you wearing for the holiday celebration?
I don't wear a whole lot of costumes myself these days.
So you walk around in just in natural, or what do you do?
I might wear a little mask or something, but it's more about my daughter these days.
Okay,
She's gonna be a little bumblebee. So
there you go.
I was very happy to bring her to the Halloween store, and she was having fun getting scared by all the things that jump out and pop out. So she definitely has my blood in her. She's definitely my child.
So you like that stuff. We're going to talk about it, I know. So you, just so our listeners know, AC really likes a lot to scare his child. Now, I don't know if that's a good parenting model, but you're just starting out, so we can probably forgive you with the first child. By the eighth child, you'll have to realize that's not going to work because they'll scare you by then.
I don't doubt it, but she's a little daredevil. She likes living on the edge, so I think it's just her little personality. But yeah, I love Halloween. It's my favorite holiday and time of year. Really, the Halloween community is very passionate about the atmosphere and traditions that surround this season. This fandom has evolved a lot into a real culture of its own and a lifestyle for many people. And, well, I would say I identify with a lot of that. I'm also not crazy over the top, not wearing skeletons every day of the year, but I do own a lot of spooky shirts myself. But, I mean...
Just don't wear them to the office. I get frightened easily.
No, I try to be aware of my surroundings.
That's good to hear.
So, tell me a little bit, based on your knowledge, what are the background of Halloween in general? Where does it come from? I mean, at this point, it's hard to know what's myth, what's truth.
Well, yeah, and you have to, if you do a lot of first source study, it'll help you because there's a lot of information on the internet, but we both know not everything on the internet is accurate. But there's a lot of first source stuff that will simply tell you what I've known through the years and learned from others as well. And it's originally, as far as I know, a Druid holiday that was called the Vigil of Samhain. In early Britain, I believe it was called Samhain. It's actually spelled Samheim, but it's pronounced Samhain. The Druids worshipped the sun god, names like, the sun god's name most of the time was Bel. Some think Baal, I think that's kind of a stretch. Or sometimes it's called Crom, Crom. That's it. On the 31st, it was believed that he had died and went to the kingdom of the dead, which would have been Anwin, I believe it is. And the purpose of Samhain was to ensure his return. So, and even witches will admit that in part of this, like the Druids, there was human sacrifice. You see that if you read about, there's a book called The History and Origin of Druidism. And so you'll see that it's believed that innocent bloodshed would resurrect Bel. And then, so that's why some would say infants were also slain in Druid altars. Human blood opened up the gates of that, Anwin or whatever that place was called, and released the spirits for just that night. And thus October 31st became associated with many things, including ghosts and spirits.
Okay.
That's where that, as far as I know, comes from.
Sure. How about the Christian aspect of Halloween? I did a little bit of research heading into it. Obviously, the 31st leads up to All Saints Day and All Souls Day, so All Hallows Eve.
Yep.
Kind of is another origin for Halloween. What's the Christian church relationship to Halloween been?
That's a great question. I think a lot of listeners don't understand that, like so many of our holidays that we as Christians celebrate on the calendar, they were really pagan celebrations, and they just tried to Christianize them. And in some cases, we were pretty successful. In many cases, like this one, not so much. Back in 608 AD, the Roman Emperor Constantine kind of appeased the people by trying to unite them by bringing important festivals together. He had come to faith, or before that, the Christian faith had really come together a little more when Roman Catholicism became a kind of a world, I guess we call it a political and religious power, the pagan customs were still widely celebrated, and the Roman Catholic Church wanted to do something about that. So I believe it's around 800, 805 AD, the Roman Catholic Church moved All Saints' Day from May, it used to be in May, to what you and I know as November 1st. Now, all the saints who didn't have their own separate day, and if you're familiar with Roman Catholicism, every saint, there's a day for every saint in the calendar, but they had more saints than they had days, and so they had to group them all on All Saints' Day, and that became November 1st, and that hence All Saints' Day was a time when you paid respect to the dead, also by visiting their graves. That was a lot. It was the new day. That was the new day that kind of replaced the pagan vigil for the dead and was called, as you said, All Hallows' Day. It soon became a custom to call the evening before All Hallows' Eve. And of course, it probably got shortened to Halloween. So the day was popularized in America, by the way. Do you know what ethnicity popularized it, Anthony?
I do not.
Oh, you're wearing the shirt. It's the Irish
Oh.
in the 1900s. Now, again, it's an important fact to note that once again, Christians tried to Christianize the day, and this one, they failed miserably. Now, I mean, if you're into commercialism, it's the second top day. I believe people spend more money on decorating their homes and themselves and costumes than I'm thinking than they do for decorating Christmas. I'm pretty sure.
You don't see Christmas stores pop up all over you, but you have all these seasonal Halloween
But the
stores.
Christmas stores that do pop up say you don't have to be 18 to get in there, but we'll talk more about that at the end.
Great. So bringing it to 2019, do you have any reservations about how we celebrate Halloween as a culture today? Is it okay for your kids to dress up and go trick-or-treating, or what do you see just the current climate of the holiday as a Christian?
Well, I think it's certainly changed since I was a little boy and went trick-or-treating in South Central Los Angeles, which today no one in their right mind would do that in the dark, just so you know that out there. But there's a lot of things. First of all, as Jesus followers, we always want to make sure that we don't do anything that God says, just don't do. It's not an option. This isn't adiaphora or your Christian freedom. It's not a gray area. If God says don't do it, don't do it. Or if he says, make sure you do this, make sure you do that. In the gray areas, we don't want to go against our conscience. And so there are going to be some families listening to me and some people listening to me say, I have no problem celebrating Halloween in a certain way. And others saying, I just can't celebrate it at all. And you have to go according to your conscience. And I'm one of those people that, with my children, did not celebrate it, mainly because of other areas of work in the occult and working with kids and adults in the occult and people who committed crimes in the name of Satan. So I'm a little more hypersensitive to that. But you think of trick or treat. I mean, that's the number one thing. I mean, who doesn't want to get candy? I'm an adult. I still like candy. I like when people give me candy. That works for me. But it's the idea that I don't know that I want my kids and other kids to be dressed up as the half-dead and zombies to go ahead and get it. Where that really comes from, as far as I know, is people dressed up so that they could maybe fool the evil spirits they believed that were swirling that night. And they would put animal skins on or other disguises, and it's kind of a way that they could exorcise them in a certain way. And people were to set out a treat of some kind of food or fruit, probably a baked good or fruit, and provide that wandering spirit, that ghost running through the night, something to eat. And if the demon spirit was satisfied with the treat, that's what I've read at least, it was believed that they wouldn't trick you by casting an evil spell on you. Have you ever heard that?
Yep.
In other words, things like wreaking havoc on, I know, back in that day would be drying up your well or souring your milk or causing the cattle to die or whatever it was. You'll hear about people who say, there's some history about the Druids, that the Druids would actually, in Ireland, would go through the neighborhoods and countryside on the eve of the 31st of October and collect offerings for Satan. And so they would carry their lanterns and bags of money and canes with a very sharp point sometimes. I think that's where I think we get the leprechaun staff from. I'm pretty sure. I can't be certain, but I'm sure I'll look at Wikipedia, and of course that's a great source. That'll tell me. Or sometimes they would carry like good luck horns. I'm not really sure what that was, or fairy wands. You see that a lot. At each house they would ask for a specific amount, and if the household didn't give you what they wanted, they would trick you, and I'm not really sure what that always would be. Sometimes they'd take one of your prize animals. There's a lot more written about that in this book. There's a book called the Seven High Pagan Masses on Halloween or something like. Yeah, that was it by Irene Park. That's a pretty good book. Now, in later years, there's others people who've written about that. Some say Irish farmers went from house to house and were begging for food for their ancient gods. And that again, if you didn't give it, they threatened to have some harm done to you. Either they would do it or they would hope the spirits would. The other thing that you see a lot of people put out is the jack-o'-lanterns. And man, some people are very talented at that.
Some people are just amazing.
I was not. A lot of people should not just handle knives, period. And I know now you can have tools, you're using Dremel tools, carving everything. I think some of that's pretty interesting. But there's so much about the jack-o'-lantern out there that what it all represents. The most of which I've known and I've taught people through the years is that the apparently harmless pumpkin face, the jack-o'-lantern, is really allegedly a symbol of an ancient damned soul. It used to be either a pumpkin or a turnip or maybe even a skull with a candle in it. The candles were to kind of represent the fairy fires or the will-o'-wisps that, in other words, represented a lost soul trying to find its home during that night. They would hearken back probably to the Samhain fires. There were not bonfires, but actually bone fires where they would burn bones of both animals and allegedly human beings, and that would conjure up, the light and that darkness and the god of darkness. There's others that said, I heard one guy say that one time, it's really named after a guy named Jack who couldn't enter heaven or hell, and as a result, he wandered that night and had to wander with a lantern until Judgment Day. There's a lot of things people talk about. Some people say you put a candle in it because it ward off evil spirits, so it's been around for some time. Probably for the most part, I think it was also a symbol for people who perhaps were just sympathetic to that night's Samhain and that celebration, and that they believed people who had died and didn't find a home, or that the demons and evil spirits and lost souls were somehow released that night and would wander that night, and somehow they put the candle out there to say, hey, we're on your side. Please don't do anything bad to my barn or my house or my wealth. Then, my other thing I have sometimes trouble with, and you often talk about mischief, and I know we're going to talk about people smashing pumpkins and pulling pranks and maybe doing some more violent things. Yeah, I think that comes part of it, that whole trick thing. Hey, you didn't give me anything, so I'm going to trick you, or it was an excuse for lawlessness. The thing that also bothers me about Halloween oftentimes is I've worked with witches, and I've worked with warlocks, and I've worked with people who are really true Satanists, and they laugh at people who claim to be Christians running around dressed like them on that night. Not talking about bumblebees or a pirate or how many Avenger people are out there right now, right?
Well, that's what I was wanted to ask. So, if you're a Christian, should you have the same reservations of the holiday if you know that you're not celebrating it for those reasons? If you're celebrating it for the commercial aspect of we're going to buy some costumes as your favorite Power Ranger or Avenger just to get some candy as more of a communal...
I don't so much because I guess it would have been different a little when my kids were smaller, because I was right in the middle of working with people who had committed crimes for the occult or in the name of the occult and Satanism. And so my kids didn't trick or treat in that sense. We had some alternatives. I mean, I gave my kids candy because they're like their father. They like candy and all that stuff. And they dressed up in all sorts of costumes. It just wasn't like the half dead.
Sure.
But yeah, it's just that don't dress your kid up like things that Halloween, the Druid version of Halloween, really celebrated. The black cats were thought of as being reincarnated witches, or they had done something wrong, so they were a cat. Or sometimes they were considered like the assistant to the witch. Then you have people like Dracula, right? You've got Vad the Impaler, and you can read about him yourself. Not a nice guy. Who wants to dress up like an impaler, a guy who would just impale bodies on his fence and other posts just to scare the snot out of people? It's a very wicked ruler. But you can read about that yourself, or even, there's lots of other ones. I guess, as Christians, we know, don't dress like a witch. The Bible has a lot to say about witchcraft being sinful, and it lists it in so many passages. You'll see, for example, in Galatians chapter 5, verse 20, mentioned with the things that God detests. Witchcraft is in there. So I think you want to be really, really cognizant of that. If you're going to celebrate it in what I would call the American style, don't dress your kids up like something that God would say, why are you glorifying the darkness when I sent my son to live a perfect life and then die in your place to conquer sin, death, and Satan? That very darkness you're playing with, because I can tell you, that darkness is evil, both for your physical welfare and especially your eternal one. So yeah, I guess if you're going to dress them up as a bumblebee, which is a cool thing, right? Or people, I love when people dress up their dogs, since we're really big foster dog people. I think that's like awesome. But I'm noticing now more and more that we're having Halloween during the day, and that's for safety reasons, and I think that's not a bad idea. Really? And the plus, positive side, you can get to know your neighbors, but then your neighbor's got the yard dressed up like, hi, it's a graveyard. And someone's going to pop out and then give me a Reese's peanut butter cup, which is frightening because I hate those things. So, it's just, I don't know.
Okay.
I'm conscious bound in a certain way, and maybe someone's listening to me is going, my kids will never do that, or people listening right now to me thinking, boy, you're making a mountain out of a molehill. And maybe from your vantage point you would, but if you saw some of the things I saw with people who profess to be demon-possessed, you wouldn't play with the other side, nor would you want to dress up like it. Sure. And so that's why I'm pretty sensitive to it.
Okay, that's very fair. So touching back on the mischief aspect, particularly like October 30th is a notorious day for mischief. It's why it's known across the nation as different names: Hell Night, Devil's Night in Detroit, where there's just known for the fires.
Yeah.
Like that's, I would say, a step beyond mischief, but it's just
lawlessness.
So obviously that part I would say I wouldn't agree with in that kind of spirit of Halloween. But what would you want to say if a younger person is listening to this podcast and maybe their friends are thinking about going TPing or egging?
Don't. It doesn't matter if it's October 30th or 31st. Don't ruin someone else's property. As a Jesus follower, we're supposed to love our neighbor as ourselves. I don't know anybody that wants their neighbor to come over to their house and do damage to it by maybe tagging it with a spray can or, I don't know, doing some other kind of mischief. Just don't do that stuff. Don't say, oh, it's not my fault. I can't be held responsible because, well, after all, it's October 31st or October 30th. You're just looking for a rationalization to your sin, and that's just dumb. I mean, that's the same people that say, well, I had to do this or I had to do that because that's the way I was born. Okay, just be quiet. We're all born sinful in need of a Savior, all born spiritually dead. That's not an excuse. Next time you come in late, I don't know I don't know what your dad was like, but my dad used to say, be home at 10, okay? And if you're, he'd be there with a watch. So I remember running through people's yards, hurdling fences just to get there on time. Because if I wasn't, well, he's not going to say, oh, I know it was really tough tonight. My point is, don't make excuses for your own sin or not following the rules. You and I don't have any right to break the rules, period.
Well said. Something I really want to know your perspective on. One of my most defining traits is my love for movies. I wouldn't be producing this podcast. I wouldn't be working for St. Mark if it didn't stem
from
my love for just media in general. Where kind
Veggie Tales, great.
Where that kind of maybe road diverges is particularly my love of
Please
horror
don't tell
movies.
me you're like my wife. Are you like a Hallmark movie junkie? Because she's been watching them since July 1st.
To me, that's the true horror, would be having to sit through Hallmark.
Well, they're all the same. There's always a girl who just got dumped or is lonely and thinks she's never going to be married and her biological clock is ticking. Then some guy dumps her, but the new guy comes into town. It's always the same plot. My wife watches it and I tell her, this is how it's going to end. Oh, I've already seen this one 5 times. Well, why are you watching this? But she likes it and makes her happy, and I have another TV.
Sure. But no, I love horror movies. I just always have. It's just one of my favorite reasons why I love the Halloween season. It's one of the major reasons why I love the Halloween season. And I really say season because it starts in September in my house and a lot of people's house, where you just start binge watching those horror movies, those spooky movies. I know you've said that you're not a fan. I just really want to know your thoughts on a genre of film and entertainment that skews to that spooky side, I guess. And just what are your thoughts on that?
Some horror films are just there if they're done really, really well with their music and the camera angles, as you know, as a professional, suddenly to scare you. Look at back in the Hitchcock movies in the 50s and I think 50s and 60s, or some of those back there where they didn't use gore, but they used timing and lighting and surprise. I think those are great. As far as the slasher movies and so on, again, as a Jesus follower, I don't know that we should be glorifying murder of people in a sense, or the horror of people. That's again a conscience thing. I understand people can say, well, that's art or that's entertainment. And yes, you have that in games, video games people can play, and other movies or sitcoms they watch. And I think as Christians, we want to really be careful what we entertain our eyes with, because our eyes are the window to our mind and our soul. And I think you got to be very careful with that, because if you take garbage in, you're going to get garbage out one way or another. Another reason I don't like horror films, Anthony, is because many of them, especially if they have occult themes, will hire witches, warlocks, and occult experts to make sure that in those movies, if there are any seances or any other occult practices depicted, they're correct, they're accurate. And that's where a lot of kids who want to delve deeper into that dark side, they'll watch the movies and copy them exactly. And so a lot of that, I personally, I wonder, why does anybody want to watch Friday the 13th, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? I don't know how many there are, but there's a lot of them, or Jason, or I don't know who all those people are.
There's 11 to 12.
Okay, that's great. It's going to be just like that car one, was it Fast and Furious? Finally, how many are we going to make of that, for crying out loud? But I just think God's called us to live in faith, and God's called us to live with no fear. And for me, seeing horror films, maybe that's just because I'm easily frightened, but I just don't do that. And especially the cult themes, I certainly don't. I can remember once when I was at seminary, I think it was my second year at seminary, and it was some break. I think it was Thanksgiving break or Christmas break, and I was still there with a couple guys because my parents lived out of state. And together, one night, we rented the movie, which one was it? The one with the possession. I'm trying to think of The
Exorcist?
Yeah, The Exorcist. And I went back to my room that night. Now, granted, I'm at the seminary. Remember that?
Mm-hmm.
And I slept all night with the light on. I'm at the seminary, for crying out loud. And that scared because that's real. There's a real demon. If you read Ephesians 6, you talk about we live on an invisible battlefield where sometimes we see the other side. And the devil can take a lot of different forms. And so when you see a depiction of The Exorcist where there were some true parts of that, I don't know that I want to play with that or have fun with it. The other reason, just a final reason, I'm not really a fan of horror films is because a lot of them lead kids down a road to the occult, meaning those hidden things or dark things. Whether it's some movies that have those themes, slasher movies or so on, occult readings, or they start playing with things like Ouija boards, and I can go on, and maybe we'll have a later podcast about that, because once you ask the dark side to come and entertain you, sometimes you get what you ask for, and then you'll never want to get what you ask for, because then something's in the room that you kind of believed in, but you didn't really believe in, and now it's shown up, and now you got yourself a visitor that's not going to want to leave really quickly. But if I could just, Anthony, just tell you one thing that I've seen happen over the last 10 years, is that I believe Halloween, the problem with it is it's not the Halloween I grew up with when I was a pirate every year. We didn't use bags of candy. We used a pillowcase because we were getting buku candy, right? I always wondered, my parents probably didn't love me and my brother, but they trusted God because they sent us out in those costumes at 7 at night in South Central Los Angeles and said, just watch for cars when you cross the street. Well, thanks, Mom. Either you had a great life insurance policy on us, or you just trusted that God sent angels and we'd be all right on the way back, which I think it was the latter one. But here's the thing, it used to be like pumpkins. You ever been on a hayride?
Once.
Okay, yeah, hayride, you got to do it too. Or dressing up, like I said, a farmer, trick-or-treat and all that stuff. That was great, but now it's not done that. Now it's gone, in its history, it's gone from that celebration, kind of that. Now it's become, it went from a childlike fun night, and it's no longer so innocent. I think it's not just because of the occult, it's because of sex. I think Halloween now has become an adult thing. It's like good girls gone bad in a certain sense. That's why you and I talked about before, all of a sudden, about mid-September, is it?
Yep.
Those Halloween stores show up in stores that don't have anybody in them. And it says, you have to be 18 or older. You ever wonder why that is? Oh, man, you got Little Red Riding Hood in her thigh highs and miniskirt, and she doesn't seem to be en route to like grandma's house, you know what I'm saying? Or you got Goldilocks. I saw Goldilocks once wearing platform heels, giving me the impression that she's sleeping in everyone's bed at one way or another. You got all sorts of uniforms. You got people that wearing less than a Victoria's Secret model does at the mall on one of those pictures or posters and so on. You've got, a cowgirl in a mini skirt with the size of, you kind of get the point I'm making here. I think the images are more of a strip club than a storybook a lot of times. And so it's no wonder those Halloween stores put out there, you got to be 18 years old or accompanied by a parent. And that, you don't see a lot of adults wearing, Despicable Me or something like that. Although it's probably some Avengers today. Although I just saw advertiser on the news that someone was trying to take Popeye's chicken sandwich and make it into a sexy adult costume. Now I'm telling you, if you're wearing a Popeye's chicken sandwich and you think you're sexy, that's a problem. If you're looking at someone and they're wearing that and you think that person's sexy, you got real issues because you're drooling over a chicken sandwich. That's just wrong in and of itself. So I think Halloween, as far as kids go, can be something innocent and fun. But a word to adults that are listening here: if you dress up like a porn star and you act it out like one night, that ruins the whole thing. I mean, I think sometimes we adults are the ones making it bad.
Sure.
Now, I would just say this to people saying, what about alternatives? This is something we did. We did a lot of different things to reach out to the community, give people a safe place, a different view of that night where we celebrated the fact that God worked through the reformers like Martin Luther to bring us back to the truth that we're saved by grace alone, by faith alone, and the one who's conquered death and darkness for us. And so we would do things like we would have a Reformation party where everyone came. They got lots of candy. I mean, a ton of candy. But they had to dress up like a biblical or a Reformation character. And that was a lot of fun. And we did things like that. A lot of congregations will do trick or trunk or treat. You ever hear that?
Yeah. Like I've been going to a website that lists all the like Halloween or family-friendly trick-or-treat stuff, and
there's a lot of good stuff out there.
And but yeah, trunk or treat's been something that's been popping up almost daily, and I have no idea what it is.
Well, a lot of times people will come to at least this is the ones I've seen. You'll come to a church parking lot, and there'll be a bunch of cars, and you go from back trunk to back trunk, and so on. That's the one I've seen. Maybe there's a whole different one. I don't know, to be quite frank with you. But we have never done that. We did the one where we had the big neighborhood parties where they'd meet in our gymnasium of one of our sites and go ahead, and we had a lot of fun, and the kids loved it, and a lot of great costumes. I mean, there are a lot of creative parents out there. Usually it's the moms who put these costumes. Now you can buy these costumes. Like, did you make your Bumblebee costume for your daughter?
Absolutely not.
You did not. Okay. But you don't. There's a lot of stuff out there. There's some adorable ones. It's just that if you as a family decide you're going to celebrate Halloween, do it in such a way that your Christian witness is not hidden. I mean, don't go around, yeah, we're Jesus followers and we belong to this church or this church or we belong to St. Mark Lutheran. But look at my kids. I've got one looks like a zombie with an axe out of his head and the other's a witch. Not good. Mm-hmm. Not wise choice. Not a wise choice. Now, it's another thing if you have them dressed up as, well, this is a pastor. That'd be a great thing to dress up as, a pastor.
You want a lot of little Pastor Parlows?
No, I don't want to do that to any kids or neighborhoods at all. But, my point is there's a lot of good characters you could be out there. There's a lot of good movies that you could emulate in a certain sense.
Sure.
That's what I got.
Great. No, I think it was a great thing to dive into. I don't think it's something that's really explained. Obviously, you hear either Halloween is bad or you really just have more ambivalence towards it. So I think just diving in and just explaining from really your unique perspective of the situation, I think it will help a lot of people just analyze and consider their actions around Halloween.
Just make sure, again, you want to let your light shine. That's what Jesus says in Matthew 5, and you can do that on that night as well. And be sensitive to your God-given conscience. Paul talks a lot about that in Romans 14, and Paul talks about that specifically to young Pastor Timothy in 1 Timothy chapter 1. And don't be so quick to judge your neighbor. Maybe your neighbor who's a Jesus follower doesn't know all of the trappings as well, and they're just innocently dressing their kid up as Casper the ghost, the friendly ghost, which, just for the record, there are no friendly ghosts, and there are no ghosts, period. When you die, you go to heaven or you go to hell. God is, and the Bible does not tell us he lets people out to roam and scare us on one night.
Sure. I think that's also an important thing is put away your judgment shoes. Maybe.
Just be careful not to start out that it's not a hill worth dying on sometimes. There are more important things. But that also means as from a Christian standpoint, as a family, just think about what you're going to do and make sure you think it through.
Great. Well, thanks, John, for having this great, insightful discussion on Halloween as we approach it. Thank you to our listeners for joining us on this special bonus episode. We look forward to seeing you back on our regular episodes. And as always, we want the fear of God to reign in your lives.
Hey, and a special thanks to Anthony. Thanks, Anthony, for pinch hitting.
No problem. And I'm always happy to be on the podcast whenever we get a little weird and a little more unusual. So that's a little more my trademark. That's the flavor I bring to When Fear Reigns.
Well, you said it. I didn't.